Well, hello there everyone. Here to show you the main character library calling activity right here. As you see right here that I went into an example right here of a plane, and like what I'm mainly known as like for like a biplanes, and as well as a building right here, and then some land, land sceneries, and along right here is a river, along with the river boat. But talk about with main characters. If most of all the story readers and as well as authors, if you've ever known about that, exactly about what is the the difference between like what you call like from a for if we were to be reading any type of article, or if it's any type of novels or anything like that, checking out any type of book, from the library, and knowing about, if we were to think about, I'm like, who's the main character, and who the main character usually is, and for the most part is that the main character is usually the person that from whenever the story begins, is that according to my understanding, that a lot of times it's like whenever the story begins is knowing that the person's name, and then as well as for what's going on in the story, from the first few say one to three paragraphs of the story, and I can maybe give about maybe several examples of stories that have like what's these characters, to where that knowing about that if there's like maybe a cousin or brother and sister, maybe that they mention as well, but I just drew some examples right here, but I didn't use any examples maybe like anything like the Three Little Pigs or anything like that. But you have right here is an example right here of this person is a main the main character, but I'm like, I did not give him a name. I'm like, it could be maybe a male or a female, but on the other hand, and knowing about with the most time with most main characters is that that whenever we're reading a story, is knowing that that how often do we know about that with the main character, is that if they the main characters are more likely that they are mentioned, they are in the story nearly 100% of the time, compared to other characters that were like what's going in like the short story if it's poetry or poems or anything like that. But you have right here, as I would drew an example right here of this person right here. I did not give him a name or nothing, but let's just say that if this was a main character right here, and I have other examples of books around, and then maybe I can pick a few books that maybe I remember reading as a kid, besides the Three Little Pigs, and then a few books that I don't remember all the names of them, but talking about is like what are main characters, really that whenever we start reading about a story, that if it's maybe a Lewis and Clark, or if it's anything to do with maybe Alexander, maybe The Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, that type of book, or if it's anything that's related to like maybe not fiction, non-fiction type stories, or if it's science fiction, or if it's love, poetry, that type of stuff. But knowing about that, if we were to be checking out books at the library, and knowing that if for most of the time that I can remember that whenever I got older, whenever I was in high school, that they have you to where that they would give you an hour to read through a book, and then you pick out whichever one. Whichever book that you were interested in, knowing that exactly about what's going on in the story, maybe have you write one or two paragraphs about what you think is going on in the story as well. And anybody that it may have had that experience, I know I've had that experience, to where I start reading a book, and then you're kind of like wondering that it start especially that anybody, the way I would think about it, that I kept thinking about that really, and whenever I start reading a book, especially if there's no pictures, in the in any of the pages, that a lot of times it's hard to kind of understand about what's going on in the story. Some that may have their own opinions about it, they may say that whenever you start reading that it keeps talking about, it's like for this person that they talking about going going fishing, and then they're like, they talk about the, the equipment, they collect, you say the fishing poles, and then they talk about, getting in the boat, and then, maybe if it's, a person that they're with, that type of stuff, if it's like what you call, person, place, or thing. But on your hand, and knowing about, you have right here is the main character, and that this could maybe also be an example right here. This photo could maybe be an example right here of an author, and if we have maybe experience, I talk about being an author of a book, more likely that could maybe mean it's like if it, and there been maybe it was published, but they probably say that really I can remember whenever I was in the 5th grade, I can remember watching a video about that if you really wanted to publish a book, that they may, I guess a lot of times that they say depend on how many pages, etc., etc., that how much money it costs. But let's just say that that right here, using right here is for the main character. But let's just say if we were talking about an author, though, that if they were to write a book about the recent airplane ride, and then the recent airplane ride, or it could have been maybe the flight to maybe Southern America, or maybe up to Canada, somewhere somewhere like that, and knowing about what they explored while they were there, that type of stuff. But in a lot of ways, if we were to be reading any type of story, though, that about any type of book about if it's the sailors or it's explorers, those type of like say for the Christopher Columbus, say adventures or anything like that. But other books that more likely that you'd be reading about, that knowing about, really, that they ask them like who the main character, that I even heard, though, that knowing about that that sometimes in some stories, though, that they say that that there are some people that some bad situations that goes on such in the story, such as that if maybe if there's a situation in the story to where that they run out of fuel in an airplane, or they wind up getting lost, and then they're trying to figure out. I'm like, if most of us have read those type of stories to where that people are in an airplane, and then they wind up crash, or they wind up landing somewhere or something like that, and then there may be people that survived, that type of stuff, and then knowing about how they survived, and where the wilderness from where they were, and also that talking about, it's like for the main character, though, but you have right here, you got right here as an example right here of a main character, and right here I went ahead and drew right here as an example right here of a plane. And if most of us are probably wondering about that we maybe like to see maybe a pilot, a person that's in the pilot seat of the plane here. But let's just say that this was like an example right here of an aircraft. And whenever I was a kid, I can remember that a lot of times that I had a few model airplanes too. But a lot of times that most young kids, that if they see something kind of like this, maybe at the museums or somewhere like that, then maybe just a little bit smaller, something like this, and then they want to kind of touch it, if it's anything that and not just the picture, but they say that yeah, go ahead, maybe add just a little bit with the pencil, just make it look a bit. I'm like, yeah, that sometimes I just kind of experiment around for what I can do with the pencil right here. Just add just a little bit of shading right here around the plane, if I want to give it like, let's say if it was like 3D. But more likely they usually say that if you want to go ahead and make a 3D sketch of an airplane, or maybe a shuttle, a space shuttle, or if it's a car make or something like that, then a lot of times they say that there's ways to do it, but a lot of times it takes up to 2 pieces of paper just to make it look like it's 3D, like make one side darker than the other, but and then lighter, and then and then use like what you call up to maybe 4 or 5 different shade tones with the pencil. And in a lot of ways that I can maybe I'm like, yeah, that they would maybe take a few more minutes too, but just showing you right here is that if this was like a story right here of an airplane, but And then knowing that I'm like, yeah, whenever you sketch and then erase some parts, and then they usually say that sometimes if you want to go ahead and maybe take a fan or just blow on it just to kind of wipe away that that eraser, like the eraser dust. But on the other hand, knowing that with the charcoal pencil right here, and then right here down here would be as example right here of a river, and you get right here is knowing that that yeah, I'm trying not to smear the marks here, but you have right here example right here of the river, and knowing about that if I were to go ahead and blend a little bit of that right there, that there would be like say parts to say where the sun will be coming in, that type of stuff. But you got right there is like a river boat right down here. But for the main character, if the story were to be like that this character that we're getting to a boat and they start sailing somewhere, and then they see something, it's like we're talking about a story about about the bear. The bear went over the mountain. The bear went over the mountain. The bear went over the mountain to see what he could see. But if I can remember right, that may have been a song or something like that, riddle or something like that, from the 5th grade or something like that when I heard that. But anyway, but you have right here is an example right here of a boat, and then if this will be sailing, if that would be like say sailing, to the east or something like that. But north, from west to east. But anyway, and then you have right here is a building, and if most of us are familiar with like you say perspective type drawing work, that show right here is a building that I know that a lot, like if the vantage points would be about right here and right here, that knowing about how the perspective drawing works, from how the building matches up, and knowing about like from the building, and then with the cars right here, and if we were think that be going somewhere where there's a building, that you would more likely see maybe some trees about right here. Got some trees right here. Let's see here, draw as like the tree branch, kind of like that right there. And then you have right there is the car right there, and then along say the parking lot. But anyway, and they may some that may say like that there's only really so much you can see, especially if the airplane was right there, and then knowing that it's like. That I can remember that whenever I was young, that knowing about what I think that a view from an airplane would more likely look like, because on the other hand that if you I remember reading a book, I'm trying to remember what it was, the name of it, but it was about these two boys who built an airplane that made out of pieces and parts to say that they could find around the house, including taking the car engine from the father's car, and as well as they found a propeller in the garage. But then they found they used windows as like for the for the side for the pilot, the cockpit or something like that. But anyway, I don't remember the name of that story, and I'm sure anybody here that was like that's if they can remember either. But basically that the whole part of the story is, I think it was the thing, the flight for the brothers or something like that was the name of the story. But anyway, but knowing about you have the main characters, is like your main character library, is that you have right here an example right here of an airplane. And I can go ahead and work a little bit, maybe with a little bit with the charcoal, maybe just a little bit charcoal tone right here for the wings, and but and I was also thinking about if I want to go ahead and maybe add a little bit of red. I'm sure it's like well, use something else other than black and white. But anyway, not making it looking even like military, but. For most planes like these that most of the time I usually see them in like a red type color, and knowing about if there's like different designs and different colors, it's like stripes for what they present as well. But you have right here is like an airplane right here, an aircraft, and knowing that if this person that the main character that they would be talking about, that from whenever, you know, their adventure, from whenever that they you know, sailed, or whenever they sailed across the Atlantic Ocean or something like that, or whenever they flew over the Missouri or the Mississippi River, and then they explored something, or they seen got a good view of the clouds, you know, that type of stuff. And knowing about that, anybody that may say that, you know, if you're going to be reading a story, that knowing that, you know, with these stories, that if anybody were to think about that, you know, anybody would want to read about, you know, for what you've seen and what you want to talk about, you know, that type of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that for a lot of the schoolwork that I'm working on, as of course is working on the spelling and grammar, and anybody that may say that, I'm like, yeah, that you know, you can go ahead and use pictures as an example, but then on your hand, that knowing that you know, if you ask, it's like you know, hey, that you know, you need to correct your punctuations and, you know, stuff like that. But on the other hand, that you see right here is that I add in right here is a little bit of red right here, and then I can go ahead and see here, maybe a little bit of pink as well. You got right there's a little bit of pink right there. You got right there, so you see the cockpit right there. And then from there, a little bit of blue right down here. Just like that, yeah, blue would likely look good for maybe the wings or something. But anyway, but you got right there is the, you know, the airplane. I'm like, yeah, that so if I want to go ahead and maybe add a little bit of scenery, you know, for maybe the sky, for what the, more likely what the sky looks like, if there's any clouds in the sky as well. But anyway, but knowing about the whole purpose about the main character, you know, the main character, you know, the person who's doing that most of the talking, as well as knowing that you know, who's flying the plane, and where they go, and then where they landed, with the, you know, the type of a flight experience that they experienced. And the way I think about it, that if be writing a book, and as well as knowing about the main character, you know, the person that if most stories that we read about, that they say that, you know, yeah, well, in a lot of ways, that knowing about that there are a few characters to where that one of them winds up getting killed at the end, or that one of them winds up now not staying along with the team or something like that, you know, that type of stuff. But any stories that more likely that we may read about, that if we're to go so far as the question to where that if you know, if they survive, and as well as knowing about, you know, if they you know, if it's a true story, or if it's not a true story, or just like some type of a poetry novel or anything like that, English literature, you know, that type of story. But the way I would think about it, though, that if we're going to be reading a story, though, is understanding about the main character. The main character more likely is like it could be that some that may say that the main character is you, that person, to where that you know, for the main character, I can go ahead and write right here that is, you know, for a person, you know, a person you know, who you know, is mentioned. I can go ahead and say is mentioned, you know, in the story. And it's like, so far as, you know, like for once upon a time, you know, it's like if we're mentioned in the story, and as well as knowing and you know, understanding about that you know, you know, the person the person you know, who also so you go ahead and say, you know, for also, yeah, a person who also is in the, you know, the story nearly see here 100% of the time. I'm like basically I'm like, yeah, you know, stories that I've read about, that they say that, you know, yeah, that knowing about, you know, if you know exactly who the main character is, and they may say that I'm like, yeah, that they have names, and as well as, you know, whoever that that you decided to solve the situation, that type of stuff. But let's just say that if we would be looking around for knowing about who the main character is, and the main character is basically that knowing that they appear at the very beginning of the story, and then that they are still there towards the end of the story, and basically that any other characters that more likely that may just vanish as knowing about them. Like, yeah, if it's like what you call is like maybe if it's a family or a friend or somebody like that, that they are only in the story during the first 2 pages, and then they're not mentioned towards the end of the story, that type of stuff. But the way I would think about it, though, is like if we would go, say, be turning pages to a normal storybook, such as like if it's maybe an 8 or 9 page storybook, if it's going to include a few pictures and then as well as the main character, that knowing about that this person, that I can maybe pick a name in random, such as that I Peter, I guess I can go ahead and maybe pick a name, Peter Randall. Peter Randall. And I say that yeah, people more like say it's like Peter Randall, Peter T Randall, Peter, and then T can also stand for Peter Tyler Randall. And I don't know if there's anybody out there like there's anybody by the name of Peter Randall, but let's just say that if the main character were to be like Peter Randall, Peter T. Randall, and then they go ahead and build an aircraft, and then they go out flying and getting some flying experiences. And then you see right here, as I would hit that a lot of times, if we seen this right here, that there would be like what's called like a little welcome, like there would be a sign on the back of the plane, see, for like welcome home, that type of a rhyme. But anyway, but talk about is like for main characters though, is that these characters are basically, whenever we start reading about a story, that we start to hearing about this person, that person, and then that more likely though that they may say that you would more likely know about that for who's talking about, who's the main character. And then a lot of times that some stories that they say the main character is usually on the front of the book. If the book is is called like what is the great the great roles, or if it's the best known for the American type or something like that, or if it's anything about the explorer of the Appalachian Trail, or if it's the Merrimack River or something like that, that more likely that may see the main character on the front cover, and that knowing about them like that person could have been the author too. But just understanding about the main character, that with most of the time with main characters, that I think that I'm like, yeah, that with main characters, that after you start reading maybe a few paragraphs of the book, and knowing that with most, and I'm sure that like whenever I was a kid, knowing about that if I were to see airplane like this, and they say that if you want to go and pick out a book to read, and it was a part of a class assignment, and you go pick out a book, and then you read about maybe 3 paragraphs of it, and then it's like that they want you to write about maybe 1 or 2 paragraphs of whichever you read about. And I remember that a couple of times, I can tell anybody here that whenever I was young, that I would just stare at the pages, that if there was a few paragraphs to read about. But on the other hand, that knowing that one part, I think that a good way to begin the story is knowing about with Peter though. It's like Peter Randall, and knowing that for Peter Randall, and I'm going to use right here as a darker marker. But anyway, for Peter Randall is that it's like for he to work with tools. To work with tools and build something And a lot of times it's like they talk about, I'm like, yeah, if we're going to be reading that part of the story and knowing about that you know, anything that more likely to interest anybody, if it's going to be about, you know, maybe flying aircrafts, or if it's you know, riding trains or anything like that, and knowing that you see a photograph and then you know, kind of see something interesting and then you start reading about it. And a lot of times with the IQs that they may say that well, with the IQs, and you know about that you know, for one way to make a story interesting, and knowing that yeah, like the libraries that they say that, you know, talking about, you know the author's name, and sometimes that they may say that usually that the author's name would more likely be listed, you know, at the very beginning. You know, the last name will be listed at the beginning, and then the first name will be listed, and you know, right after that. But on the other hand, and knowing about with most of the time with most libraries, though, that they like the way that they categorize their books is that you know, like talking about, you know, getting a library card, you know, that type of stuff, and as well as knowing, you know, like the, you know, check out the, you know, the download libraries, you know, off the library, you know, if it's going to be related to school, or if it's just maybe the local county, or you know, the local city library, that more likely that you can download books, you know, online, and knowing about that, yeah, that exactly about who the main character is. And that kind of reminds me of that movie, you know, if most of us have remember, you know, about I think Beauty and the Beast, I think was the name of the yeah, that Disney movie, Beauty and the Beast, if I can remember right. I think that, yeah, she read the book at least 5 times, but then she went back to the library to get, you know, to check the book out again. And it's like, you know, it's, I think, yeah, I think 2 times. I think it's been a long time since I've seen that movie, but if I can remember right, that the librarian was like, hey, you've already read it twice. But I'm like, yeah, that, you know, some books that you check out at the library, that you know, that they may say that, you know, if there's a limit for how many times you can read it, and then knowing that yeah, that, you know, you read, you know, you checked it out, but then you were not able to read the entire you know, story, like goes from chapters. Anybody that if most book readers would maybe wonder though with chapters, though, if you have right here talk about with chapters, that why is it that a lot of books, you know, why is it that a lot of times that that they go by chapters? It's like if it's, you know, chapter 1 or chapter 2 and chapter 3, and along with chapter 5, and you know, chapters to chapters to chapters. And I'm thinking though that they may say that if you start reading a story, that sometimes it's breaking down to about at least 83 paragraphs. And I'm thinking if we were to do the math right, and knowing about that, you know, by 83 paragraphs, if you were to spend maybe at least an hour or so reading a book, that more likely that you know, more, or maybe 30 minutes, and then knowing about the reading time, and knowing about for you know, what we know about what's going on in the story, and if there's pictures or not, and then knowing about that, yeah, that kind of gives you an idea, knowing about that you know, whenever you read about a story, is knowing that what's going on in the story, and as well as this person, if they're planning on you know, taking flight lessons, or if it's they're planning on going fishing or sailing across the river, anything like that. But the way I think about, though, with most of the time with most main characters, though, the main character is basically, you know, like the character to where that they are mentioned, you know, nearly 89% of the time in the story, and then they do the talking. And but then if anybody knows about really that, you know, do main characters, do most of them, or quite a few of them, do they wind up, you know, do they wind up dying, you know, at the end of the story? Do they wind up getting killed or anything like that at the end of the story, or anything like that? But I'm guessing though that most stories that they say that you know, a lot of times, most of the times that they survive, the main characters though, that they survive. But on your hand, knowing about with the main characters, that you know, if with the main character that you know, towards the end of the story, that they for whatever that they were looking for, and then whatever they were searching for, that you know, it all went, you know, pretty much all well. Sometimes there were some downturns as well. But on your hand, and knowing about, it's like, you know, for the bear went over the mountain, and knowing about that yeah, while somebody was flying, and knowing about, especially at nighttime, that that if most of us, if most of us have ever read that book, Where the Red Fern Grows, that this is starting to remind me a little bit about that movie, about that. I think Billy Coleman. If most of us have remember reading about that story about Where the Red Fern Grows, and talking about whenever he went on that walk. I think he walked about 25 miles, to go to Tahlequah. Apparently there was a town, I think far down river, to where he had to walk, just to get his dogs, the hunting dogs that he saved up, money for. And I'm sure, I remember I had the book at one time, but then it's like, but on the other hand, knowing about if most of us have ever heard of that book title and maybe read that book title, is knowing about that, something that you want real bad, and knowing about you wait about 2 years and save up your money, just to get what you want. And, but whenever I read the book, I can remember whenever the movie came out, that I can remember that a lot of times that they used to say that the books have a little bit more detail. The books are a little bit better because, not just because, the actors, but on their hand, and knowing that, really, that there may be some, just a little bit more detail about the book, such as if it's go by, say, the verbs. It's like if it's a person, place, or thing. And person, for person, place, or thing, and then long, it's like if it's a verb, and then maybe the location, and then knowing about, I'm like, for like a, poetry or anything like that, for poetry. Say, go ahead, use like, for poetry. But if there's like, for poetry, or maybe synonyms, or maybe pronouns, or if it's, segments, fragments, that type of stuff related to a story. But in a lot of ways, though, that knowing that that really, do most movies, most movies or any shows, that they may say that, some that they say that, well, that they would maybe agree at maybe 80% of the time that the book was better. And knowing about, I'm like, but the book did not have that many pictures. The book did not include, the special effects, that type of stuff. But the way I would think about, though, that if we were to think about the question to where that with most books, it's like, for the main character library, is knowing about that if we were to think about books that we read about, is that knowing that going from chapter 1 to chapter 2 and chapter 3, and then looking at the pictures, and then writing a little story about what we know about the story as well, if it's a true story, or if this is a novel, fiction, or something like that, any type of a story, mystery story, anything like that. But the way I think about that, knowing that compared to the movie and in the book, that they say that they looked at the book, and then knowing about that. I don't know if that movie, like King Kong, had ever been a movie at one time, and they may say that that movie, but the movie King Kong, if that was ever a book at one time. And I kept thinking about, I'm like, well, maybe it was back in that there was an author that published a book back in like maybe the early 1970s, or maybe the early 1900s, that there's something like that about a giant gorilla, that came from, like, I guess, I don't know if it was Japan or something, but anyway, giant gorilla. Then when you went to New York City, and to be a star, that type of stuff, and then they decided to make a movie about it, that type of stuff. But in a lot of ways, though, that any books that we read about, if they're going to be making a movie about it, or maybe a show, is that knowing that really, Mike, about how much do we learn about reading about the books, and knowing about, that reading that may not include all special effects, but unless if you were talking about maybe the special 3D glitter, like printed on, using the programs, such and such, that type of stuff. But knowing about the main character about, talking about in the story, though, is basically that whenever you start reading about a story, and maybe after about maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs, maybe about 3 or 4 pages, that kind of gets you an idea about the person that as the main character, the name, their names, and then as well as if it's Peter Randall, and then knowing about what they're planning on doing, like if they want to take a vacation somewhere, spring break vacation, or for the holidays or anything like that, where if they're going to be, near the, near the ocean, near the river, or maybe sailing somewhere, or maybe going somewhere, that type of stuff. But in a lot of ways, though, that for what we learn about, for if it's in the book, or maybe it's in the magazine, or maybe it's on the movies, or a TV show, or anything like that, and knowing about for the main characters, is that do we really get a lot of enjoyment and learning experience about reading about this character? Is that the main character that basically talks about who they are and where they from where they are, and then from the chapters, I guess after the 1st and 5th chapter, that they like to talk about the main person. If it's like for Peter, Peter was talking about this. Peter was studying that. Peter was attending school. Peter was walking on a trail. He's seen some fish, some interesting fish, or some interesting birds in the sky. That type of stuff. So knowing about different ideas for knowing about who the main character could be, and for most of the time, that knowing about for Peter Randall is that this talk about with most books is that if it's going to be about maybe a pilot, or maybe a bicyclist or anything like that, or maybe a boat on the lake, or if it's the river, somewhere like that. But the way I think about it with most characters is that if we were to pick out a name for the boat, and then if any main character had decided to say the boat that holds about a number of pounds of if it's for fishermen, and then the boat was named the great Siaco, the great Siaco the Fourth, or something like that, the great Siaco, and knowing that if they're going to be giving the boat a name, and then maybe that the boat could be named after, like maybe the famous writer or something like that, like that sailed on the river back in the early 1800s, and that type of stuff. But anyway, but talk about, say, for the main character library coloring activities, talk about understanding about who the main character is, like talk about what the main character is, and as well as knowing about the main character library color activity. Well, hello everyone. It's like talk to you about right here is like talk about is like the main character right here. It's like talk about for the main character, they could more likely appear inside of like a magazine, or maybe maybe newspapers or anything like that, and knowing about that like with a smile like this, and knowing about with most main characters, that if they will be talking about during the story, that if they start talking about something, or maybe something talk about if it's Peter this or Peter that, Peter is a 4th grader in school, and that type of stuff, and knowing about with most back to school students, and knowing about that if you're going to be reading stories, understanding about who the main character is and other characters in the story. But knowing about that a few books, of course, I have, of course, it will be like the Time Machine, and as well as a few other books like Hatchet, and then as well as a few other books I have read about whenever I was younger. It was like the Three Little Pigs, and then as well as Stuart Little, and then other books too, other book titles, and I'm sure that I can maybe think of the names of them later on. But knowing about the main characters, or they say the characters that appear in the story most of the from start to the end. It's like so far as for the heavily ever after, that type of stuff. But it's like Once Upon a Time, and then like the end or something like that. But anyway, let's talk about, say, for main characters, that if we were to be reading a book, and then it could be like, say, based on a true story or anything like that, is knowing about is like with most of the time with most main characters, that the main character that what I understand about is knowing that they start whatever that they explored, and then whatever they want to talk about as well, and knowing about when we read stories is that knowing that for what they found, and knowing that I'm like, really, is there a difference between the main character and the author? And knowing that I'm like, yeah, the author is the main character, but then they may say that maybe not all the time, all the time that the author could say that you know, they may volunteer to go ahead and write a story about a true story about, you know, what to say, maybe if it was like, you know, Frederick Douglass, if most of us have you know, heard of, like, you know, the slave of Frederick Douglass, and then as well as other books too that you may have checked out at the library, of no understanding about who the main character was, and you know, who the author was, and then knowing about if it was a publisher or creator, or if it was a photographer, artist, you know, that type of person. But I want to hear to know about with most books is, you know, understanding about the author and then the main character, and then most likely knowing about, I'm like, yeah, the author pretty much, you know, writes, and it's like, you know, for rights, and then I say for, you know, for books. But other than that, when I talk about, say, you know, the difference between the main character and the author, as I talk, say, color activity.